Um, Hello, my name is Nikki Mathew. I'm an elementary education major at Elmhurst University, and this is my research showcase for 2023. In my study, I really wanted to focus on fostering a culturally responsive environment for my English language learners. As I started my study, my teacher focused question was, how can I, as a teacher researcher, foster a learning environment for my newcomer fifth grade students to use their home languages during literacy? And my student focused question was, how do fifth grade students use their home language during literacy? I decided to stick with literacy just because at my school and my curriculum, the students have about a 30-minute period within the fifth grade, within all the fifth grade classes where they are able to go to an assigned group based on their FMP levels. And all the students that I was able to work with during this student teaching semester were all English language learners and newcomer students who were struggling a bit more with literacy. And so I really wanted to focus on creating an environment for them to be able to thrive. So context for learning, I explained a little bit of it in my previous slide, but my school is Hines Elementary. It's in a fifth grade classroom. I had 3 participants, but I'm focusing on one of my Polish and Russian newcomer students. And again, so my students are at grade level for math and below grade level for literacy. Really for me, so we have this 30 minutes and I have about 16 students in the classroom that I'm working with. Within the 30-minute block, I usually have about 10 minutes with my first group and 10 minutes with my second group. So it's hard to get through a lot of material just because we really just have a 10-minute period to work with them on a daily basis. So originally, when I started working on my my research project, I wanted to research this question just because I was working with a lot of newcomer and English language learners in my fifth grade classroom and in the school. But as I started my student teaching semester, there was a lot of racism that was happening within the fifth grade classrooms. And so as I started my research, just really creating a safe space for these students became so important to my mentor teacher and I. And so I really just wanted to help these students by giving them a safe space for them to be able to talk about their cultures without being afraid of someone making a comment or speaking badly about it, giving them a space where they could speak in their first language and really just support one another and just bond with each other. And really come to the realization that their culture is very important and it's a very important part of their identity. So that's the reason why I know that my research question was very meaningful for me. So in terms of my conceptual framework, I have a few different resources that I pulled from. So the first one was teacher research, which was from Rosvar and Toriano, 2022. This really just taught me what it means to be a teacher researcher, what the steps are, what I should be looking for, what patterns I'm supposed to be watching out for, and really what is the framework that I should be using. I also looked into Auslander's culturally and linguistically responsive classrooms. What I loved about this particular article was just really learning about what elements are needed to create a classroom that is culturally and linguistically responsive, how to best support my students. The third conceptual framework I used was about social and emotional learning. Again, just in general, with all students, social emotional learning is a very important part of them being able to develop into the people that they need to be. And so really focusing on the social and emotional learning of my students was very important during my research study and throughout my student teaching. And finally, my last conceptual framework was social media and literacy learning. So originally, again, when I was looking at my research study, I was really hoping I could include a lot of social media just for my students to be able to interact with it, be able to like make posts and, um, interact with each other's work. Um, in literacy, this did end up shifting a little bit just because I used more of my time um, using materials that would help them just engage with each other and really build connections. But it was still a really great article for me to read and use because I was able to incorporate a little bit of that social media and them interacting with each other during my lessons. For my analysis tools, I was able to use my journals, audio recordings. I really wanted video, but I was not able to do that. Artifacts and field notes. And then for my code book, it really was ultimately about being culturally responsive for me, especially when it came to my journaling and when I was trying to make my lesson plans. Really remembering to be culturally responsive and bring in materials that my students would really interact with and feel comfortable with and be seen in was very important for me. Teacher talk, this was happening when I would talk, model, or explain anything that was going on. Funds of knowledge was really important for me because I needed to be able to create a curriculum and lessons that really pull from my students' background and their home knowledge, just so that they feel comfortable with the material and comfortable sharing with each other. And finally, language support. So that's the anchor charts we have in the classroom, the sentence starters that they were given, and just materials that they're easily able to access. For my data collection timeline, so for my research, I actually was a very weird timeline because we had spring break in between, and we also had Easter break a little bit in between too, just because it was the Friday going on to the next week. So for my first 2 weeks, I was focused on a book called This Is How We Do It. And the data I was able to collect from that were more so student work and journals. And then my last week doing my data collection was more so about my journals and the audios and the transcriptions that the students were able to give me. So the book I really focused on was This Is How We Do It by Mathew. My standard, I wanted to focus on being able to help my students be able to talk with each other and build conversations with each other. And so my learning objective ultimately became I can listen attentively to the book, This Is How We Do It, and circle all the people I relate most to. And I could have a discussion with my peers about how the people in the book are similar and different from each other and myself. I chose this book because as I was reading through the book myself, I really saw how empowering it was to see these different, I believe there was 9 different people, kids from around the world who share what their life is like. And for my students, especially my newcomer students, they're coming from mostly from Russia and Ukraine. And so they miss a lot of their homeland and they need something to kind of bring them back and remind them like, hey, like this is what my life was like when I was there. And being able to share that is such an empowering experience. So that's why I really wanted to stick with this book for my lesson. So as I was going through my lessons, my first lesson really showed me that using multicultural literacy supports newcomer students see themselves in the classroom. As they were able to see themselves and each other in positions they are more open to building a community with each other. So my artifacts for this were just my lesson plans for my for my book. Really, ultimately, at the end of the day, what I found was that as I was reading through this book, the kids were just so excited. Like, they were jumping over the table to circle who reminds them of themselves, and really just having a conversation with each other. And the discourse was absolutely amazing. Whether it was students from Mexico, from India, from Europe, from Russia and Ukraine, they were all just so happy to speak about their life back in their country. And I think being able to share that passion really brought them together. I had a lot of students who were super excited just to share about which student, or which kid, I should say, from the book they related to most, and like explain why. So, for example, this is the student work from my students that I was working with. We have Mac, who is a 5th grade Polish speaking student. He's about a language level 3, F&P, F and G, and he started in late November, early December. So in Mac's work, he circled that his family looked more like the family that came from Italy. He is a Ukrainian student, but he lives with his dad, his mom, his grandma, and his siblings. And so he related most to this family in this particular page. And Aaron is my second student. He's in 5th grade. He speaks Russian. He's in a language level 2, FNP, F and G, and he started about October. And when we got to the page about homes, Aaron was super excited and told us about his home in Russia. So not only does it give the students in the classroom in his group an idea of where he comes from, but it also gives me as a teacher an idea of like what his background is, what more about his story. Because what I've learned a lot is that even with our newcomer students, in the classroom environment that we're normally in, it's hard for them to like open up about their past and life back in their home countries. But during this time, they were so open and so happy to just share with each other about what life looked like in their home countries. My second finding was students were able to freely and confidently discover their identity and support each other and their learning when they felt comfortable and safe in the classroom. So in my last week, I pulled aside students. In this transcript, I focused on Mac and Aaron. And I really just asked them about what they felt like when they were reading the book. And it was very touching to see how their view of the world and the people who live in the world was so well-rounded. They wanted to be respectful and really get to know people and care for them no matter where they're from. And I really just thought it was such a beautiful conversation that we were able to have. It went on for about 5 minutes. I was really only able to focus on the first 3 minutes, but it really truly was just an amazing experience being able to talk to them and get their input on the book. Really, even speaking with these students outside the classroom, outside our 30-minute literacy block, I should say, it's very interesting because these two, especially Mac and Aaron, are very outgoing personalities who speak up a lot during our 30-minute block. But I also have them in my homeroom class, and they're very quiet and reserved when they're around people who they're not as comfortable with. So it's just been an interesting experience seeing the switch. And so the implications and conclusions of my study. So the first implication and conclusion I kind of drew was just using multicultural literacy supports newcomer students by helping them build a community. Again, just using those resources really helps them see themselves in the classroom where they might not have for a while. So just using text and resources that really help them to see themselves is very meaningful. The second implication and conclusion I kind of came up with was using multicultural literacy assist students in seeing themselves and each other, even when they're in a new environment. So kind of adding on to the first one, it just really helps all the students in the classroom, even when you're not just working with your own EB and newcomer students, just in general, even in the full classroom, whether you have students who aren't English language learners, no matter the literacy level, the math level, using multicultural literacy helps build a community because students are really able to see themselves and really appreciate and support each other and in their own cultures and each other's cultures. And finally, my last kind of question I had was what support should be thought about before entering the first day of school. I found this book about, I want to say early March before I started this research study. And I had wished I was able to find this earlier and really share it with my whole class. Because it's one of those things you really have to think about. You don't know who you're going to have in a classroom. You don't know where they're from, their background, any of that until you meet them. And so really to get ahead of it and really show that we're fighting racism, we're going to be fighting stereotypes in this classroom is very important for the students to know. And to be able to do that, you need to have materials prepared. So I would love to know more about finding supports before the first day of school. This was my research project. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoy.